Week 2, Multimodal Assignments. I'd like to do a few things in this short video. First of all, talk a little bit about the why question, why assign multimodal assignments. Then spend a moment to define a couple of key terms. Then we will look at some examples of multimodal assignments, go over the Project 2 template to clarify its expectations, and then finally talk a little bit about what happens next and the process going forward. So to begin, why assign multimodal projects? It seems obvious to me in the 21st century that we should be teaching students to write projects that include more than just printed text, because that's most of the kind of writing, composing, designing work that they are going to be needing to do in their daily lives and in their work. NCTE, the National Council of Teachers of English, has a statement on multimodal literacies. I will link to it on our course web page as well, so you can see the whole thing. But they say the following: it is the interplay of meaning-making systems, alphabetic, oral, visual, etc., that teachers and students should strive to study and produce. Multiple ways of knowing also include art, music, movement, and drama, which should not be considered curricular luxuries. All modes of communication are codependent. Each affects the nature of the content of the other and the overall rhetorical impact of the communication event itself. I think those are great statements and intended for teachers of English language arts at all levels, including even elementary. So this whole concept of the interplay of meaning-making systems and the codependent nature of different modes of communication, I think that's really well put. And this language, this is obviously what we are going to call instructor-facing language. This is written for us, for the teachers, not for our students, but it provides a really good theoretical foundation and a really good rationale for why the value of assigning multimodal projects to students, why that is so important. So that's a little bit about the answer to the question why, and we will be talking about this in different ways throughout the course. But it's worth thinking about because there is still this, frankly, there's a double standard. And there are many people in academia who think that writing print text and writing written essays of a traditional academic and scholarly kind, that is somehow of a higher order, and that somehow visual and multimedia stuff is secondary, or even that it's play, or as they say here, a curricular luxury. Well, I don't have time to teach all that multimodal stuff because I have to teach writing to my students. I've actually heard textbook reviewers make comments much like that, saying, I have to teach analysis, and I have to teach essays, and I have to teach argument, and I don't have time for multimedia. And I think my reaction to that is those are not competing goals. You can use multimedia to teach argument. You can use multimedia and multimodal projects to teach rhetoric. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I think I'm supported by this NCTE statement. So that's some background about the why and the kind of intellectual infrastructure of this kind of work. Now let's look in some more practical detail. I want to define two key terms. The first one is multimodal. It's going to be a challenge for all of us. I know it's already a challenge for me. I've slipped up a number of times. I'd like to try to maintain a distinction between two terms, multimodal and multimedia. Multimodal compositions are what we're working on now. A multimodal composition is when students deliver a composition that is multimodal, including a mixture of communication modalities, written, oral, visual, and electronic, WOVE. It spells out WOVE. That's how I remember it. Those are the four main communication modalities: written, oral, visual, and electronic. Electronic can be, of course, a combination of those others, but in many ways it is a modality unto itself. So when we say multimodal, we're talking about the kind of project the students do, what they deliver. Students in this case are being assigned by our project. We are assigning to them a project that is multimodal in nature. The contrasting term is multimedia. Multimedia, I'm going to try to maintain the distinction. Multimedia is when we talk about how we deliver content to our students. So right now, I'm recording a video to you. So I'm using a multimedia process, screencast video, to present content to you. So multimedia, we will try to maintain as instructor content that is delivering material to students, and multimodal is the compositions that they produce for us. Again, that's very slippery. Those two kind of overlap, and it's not really a clean break there. But for our purposes, I'm going to try to keep these things straight. So Project 2 is a multimodal assignment for your students. Now, the other key term is student-facing. This also gets complicated in this class because we are constantly switching back and forth between instructor-facing and student-facing writing. We are sometimes reading and writing material like Beth Hewitt's book, Reading to Learn and Writing to Teach, is written for instructors. Obviously, you're not going to assign Chapter 12 of Hewitt to an undergraduate writing class. That's me assigning it to you. So that's what I talk about as instructor-facing language. Student-facing language is when the assignment is written for students in your class, whether those are college undergraduate students in a first-year writing class, high school students, adult learners in a corporate e-learning context, whoever your student is that you are training in this program to learn how to teach online, that's who you're writing for. So if you're teaching third grade, your assignment for Project 2 should be written so that third grade students can assign it, can understand it. If you're teaching for adult learners in a corporate setting, the assignment should be written for adult learners in a corporate setting. So again, we are flipping back and forth all the time between student-facing and instructor-facing. I will try to make it clear, but you need to be able to kind of switch back and forth and wear those two hats and think rhetorically about who the audience is for a particular piece of text. And my opinion is it's harder to write for students than it is to write for each other, because you have to use those Beth Hewitt concepts of coherence and semantic integrity. Students read fast, they're not great readers, they're not paying attention, and they don't really want to be there. So they are a tough crowd. So they're much harder to write for than we are, because we are sympathetic and we're all in the same boat together and we're all struggling and we all speak the same language. So the challenge of writing student-facing discourse and student-facing assignments is don't underestimate that. I will be coming back to you over and over and over again saying it's not clear, this is instructor speak, this is jargon, this is too high level. Can you make this more clear? And really challenge ourselves to write clear student-facing language. So those are the two key terms at the moment here, multimodal and student-facing. Both of those should be applied to the work that you do in Project 2. So let's look at some examples of multimodal assignments just to throw out some ideas for you. These are some examples of multimedia assignments. They should actually be multimodal to keep our terms straight. These are sample topics for multimodal assignments. The link is posted on our Week 2 page on the course website in the section on Project 2. These are from a textbook that I worked on with an author named Lester Fagley. He teaches at University of Texas at Austin. He's a great rhetorician and was one of the first people to begin teaching multimodal assignments and visual rhetoric at the college level. So I just copied a few of his projects from his textbook to show you the types of things that you might do. The first example is a photo essay of a place. Now this is quite similar to one of the student samples on our website, and it asks students to select a place that potentially is an interesting subject for a photo essay, and to, as you go through the steps here, eventually select and edit photographs with the photo editor, arrange them so they tell a story, and add captions. So this is a photo essay of a place. Here's another example, a causal argument website. So in this case, the students are actually composing a website that makes a causal argument, cause and effect, right? So this assignment walks students through the process, choose, divide, find, create, make, of actually composing their own website. Here's another example, a video evaluation. Find a subject to evaluate by making a video. You might evaluate something you own, such as your phone, your television, or your bicycle. Or you might evaluate something on your campus, such as the student union, a campus gym, or a campus event. So in this case, the students are actually delivering their project in the form of a video. And it describes the steps in that process here. Here's another one, an analytical presentation. Choose a subject to analyze. Just as for rhetorical, visual, and literary analyses, an interesting text will help you produce a presentation that will interest your audience, and then deliver your presentation in the form of an actual slide presentation with the visuals on slides, so like a PowerPoint deck. And then finally, the last one is an informative audio podcast. Audio counts too. It doesn't necessarily have to be visual. So in this case, students are being assigned to create an informative composition and to deliver that composition in the form of an audio podcast. So those are just a handful of possibilities. The sky is really the limit. You can get pretty creative with these, but do try to keep it anchored in a basic kind of assignment, like think of informative, argumentative, persuasive, proposal, the kinds of genres that are traditionally taught for the audience that you are writing for, whether that's first-year college students or corporate learners. Be careful about just assigning multimodal for its own sake. Keep it grounded in a sense of purpose. And I think these are really good examples, and I suggest you take a look at them. They also do a great job of dividing the project into multiple steps, which we will be doing quite soon. Okay, next, let's talk a little bit about the project template for Project 2. So this is the multimodal assignment template for Project 2. You'll notice, first of all, that it's divided into main sections: introduction, goals, criteria and timeline, resources, and assessment. So make sure that you include all of those elements to get full credit for your final project. And here's a little more detail about each section. The first section basically is the introduction. Explain what the assignment is. For example, a causal argument website, what the examples that I just showed with you. So first you want to tell students, this assignment asks you to blank. So you tell them what they're doing, explain the relevance. Why are students being asked to do this project at this point in the class? Prior to now, we have been working on writing literary analysis in a text form. Now we are going to do this in a visual form. So you're giving them some context. The next section may be a little weird, what it is not. It's very helpful when you're defining something to define its opposite. A good example is a literary analysis or a rhetorical analysis. Let's say you're assigning students to do a visual analysis of a literary text. You might say, what this is not is a personal essay, a personal evaluation. You might also say this is not a plot summary. Think about where students might get confused. If you assign them a photo essay, you might make clear the purpose here is not to teach photography skills. The purpose is to tell a story about a place. So help students understand you're doing X, not Y. It's not a plot summary. It's not a book review. It's an analysis. It's a causal argument. It's not a pro-con debate. Help to define what something is by defining what it is not. And then decisions. Tell students up front what decisions they will make and which ones will be made for them. For example, you might give them an option to use PowerPoint or Keynote, but the decision has been made for them that they need to create a slide deck. So you're kind of helping them understand where they have freedom and where their constraints are defined by your assignment. So you can make your assignment more or less flexible. I suggest keeping it fairly defined and tell them what decisions they need to make and which ones have already been made for them, so that they can, as it says here, allows them to make connections between the assignment and their personal goals and desires. And then finally, this is very important. Who is their audience? Identify the audience or explain clearly how students will identify their audience. You need to say your audience for this paper is readers of your college newspaper. Your audience is visitors to your website. Your audience is other classmates. Help them understand who their project should be written for. Otherwise, they will default to writing it for you as the instructor, and that may not be what you want. That's students' default option. They always tend to try to figure out what the instructor wants and write to please her. You want to make clear to them who they should be writing for, whether it's their peers, their parents, a school board, whoever you want them to be writing their project for needs to be clearly defined and explained here. Goals, learning outcomes. You're becoming familiar with the language of learning outcomes. Be very precise about the skills and abilities that students should demonstrate in completing this assignment. Probably come up with a short list. I think typically 3 or 4 primary learning outcomes, things that they should practice and that they need to master in order to complete the assignment. A close focus on a few is better than a long list because it gets confusing. And also, the learning outcomes in turn link down here to the rubric. If you're asking students to analyze a literary text, the grading rubric should clearly help them understand, what are the elements of analysis that they're being graded on. If your learning outcomes are not related to grammar and style, then you should not be assessing them primarily for grammar and style in their final assessment. So the learning outcomes need to be aligned with the goals of the project, obviously, and they also need to be aligned with your assessment rubric at the end so that students understand, all right, I'm trying to learn these 3 skills. I should be graded on how well I learned these 3 skills, right? Harder to do than it sounds. So define the learning outcomes and goals in this section, and then real-world technology tools you will use. Review any technologies that the students should use and provide materials that will help the students learn those technologies and get started. So if they need to take a photograph on their phone and upload it to a web page, you might want to explain to them that they will need to do that and give them some links or some kind of help so that they are able to actually complete the task that you're giving them. Criteria and timeline. Give students a general idea of how long they can spend on each task. Be sure to include any brainstorming. Ultimately, as we build this out, the timeline will be 4 weeks. The students will be building their project over a 4-week timeline. So that's where we're heading with this. For now, you need to define it in terms of 1 week for your peers. Other resources, examples of student works, if you can find them, real-world examples, and any additional resources. This is kind of the toolkit that you're giving your students to help them see, here's what one of these looks like, here's some tools that you can use, here's some other resources, anything that you can give them that will help them complete the assignment by looking at models and tutorials about that. And again, these resources will become core content for your 4-week unit as you build this out. And then last and certainly not least, the grading rubric. Students need to know up front how they're being assessed for this important project. So that's the template. Again, there are some examples on Blackboard and on the course website that follow this template. Please stick to it. You can modify it as you see fit, as long as you more or less include these same basic elements. And then finally, what happens next? Where are we going from here with this class? So this week you're writing this student-facing multimodal assignment called Project 2, and then here's what's going to happen. The following week, a classmate in the class, in RET 7372, will pretend to be a student in your class and will actually compose a project based on your assignment, as if she were or he was a student in your class. Okay, so you're actually going to get a chance to give the assignment to a student and have the student complete it. That classmate will then give you back a completed project and some feedback that says, I was confused about this, or here's what it was clear, and we'll provide some revision suggestions to help you tighten up the assignment and make it work better for your students. Following that, you will actually assess and respond to your classmate's project and provide instructional feedback as if that person was a student in your class. So you're actually basically assessing, grading, and giving feedback using multimodal, multimedia format to assess and respond and evaluate to that student's project. And then based on what you learn as a result of that process, by the time you're done with that, you'll have a much better idea of what your classmate / student found difficult and where you need to provide more support. So you'll have a lot of great user experience feedback to help you develop the step-by-step 4-week instructional unit in order to support your students and help them effectively complete the assignment. So you're getting something that we rarely get in the wild as instructors, which is ongoing feedback before you actually deliver the assignment to your students. So that's the process we'll be using. It's kind of a back and forth recursive revision loop that will help you improve your project and then build a 4-week unit to help students guide themselves to completing that project. All right, that's multimodal assignments. Thanks for listening.